number one thing you can do to reduce the loss retentions is to reduce claims. The best claim that you can ever have is the one that's never occurs.
Welcome to the Self-Insurance Podcast, brought to you by CRMBC. Every week, we're interviewing industry experts, restaurant operators, and brokers to talk about the world of workers' comp self-insurance in California. I'm so excited to welcome Tim Leech today. Tim is the Director of Risk Consulting at Alliant Insurance Services. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
And we are excited not only to have you on the podcast, but we're going to be working with you at CRMBC on risk services and loss prevention. So before we start, will you tell us a little bit about your background, both in this field and just how you came to get into this field?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I graduated Oklahoma State, way back in the dinosaur era. And, I went into the insurance industry. So I've got about 34 years of experience. I started in insurance, worked there for a little bit. I was didn't really care for it too much. Did some time in aerospace and then came back into insurance. But where I really found my niche was when I went into the brokerage side of the business. And the reason being is because I was really more focused on the client's needs and helping them be successful as opposed to the underwriters. So I've been doing it for quite a while, enjoy it, and manage a team here at Alliant. And, we're just moving forward. Yeah.
And specifically, how did you get into the risk side of things?
The risk side of things? Well, I think just from going from step to step between different organizations, finding out what I really didn't like, what I really felt was going to be meaningful. And so I want to talk a little bit about, loss sensitive programs today. And that's where I really found my niche, is particularly as it relates to workers' compensation. I do have experience across the board, property, casualty, and work comp, fleet, and the whole risk spectrum. But that's where I really found that I really enjoyed working and felt like I could really make a difference with my clients and help them be successful in reducing their cost of risk.
And let's talk about that, reducing the cost of risk. So our audience are members, are potential members, so restaurant owners, or really anyone that has a workers' comp program, but also brokers.
Sure.
So some of these words, they might have some understanding of what that meaning is, but can you talk more specifically what you mean when you say that?
Sure. So if you look at it as a pie, you think of a pie, right? You're going to have a number of different elements that kind of contribute to your total cost of risk. You might have an internal person, an administrator, or something internal that you're paying a salary for. You're going to, if it's a loss sensitive program with a deductible or an insurance or a self-insurance retention, you might have collateral that you have to, pay or put up and pay for. You're going to have claims costs that you're going to have to pay for. But the biggest aspect of your total cost of risk on a loss sensitive program, again, the ones that would be a deductible or self-insured retention, are going to be your loss retentions. And those loss retentions usually can make up somewhere in the neighborhood with work comp, somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% to 90% of your total costs. Oftentimes what clients get focused on is they get focused on fees. So for example, what are we going to have to pay our broker? And what's our insurance going to cost? And they kind of miss the, forest through the trees, as they say. So, what I like to do is focus on that loss retention, the loss retentions, because by doing that, it kind of shrinks the whole pie, if you will.
And what do you define loss retention for the audience?
Okay, so loss retentions are going to be those losses that the organization, that in this case, a restaurant, if they have a loss sensitive program, that's going to be what they're basically paying out of pocket for example, or they're having to put up, collateral for it, or the money's in escrow or what have. But essentially it's dollars that are coming out of their pocket. They're not insured. Okay, so if a client had, let's say, I work with clients, sometimes they'll have as much as $1 million per loss. And when you have a lot of work comp claims, that could be, it might have a cap on it in aggregate, but they're responsible for that first $1 million. So, you may have several $1 million in losses that you're responsible for, that are not transferred to the insurance company.
And how can in this case, a restaurant owner, because we
Sure.
do loss prevention as a whole group, but let's look at individual restaurant owners. How can one restaurant owner have an impact on this in their operation?
Yeah. Well, so the retentions are going to be made up of, the claims costs, obviously, but the number one thing you can do to reduce the loss retentions is to reduce claims. The best claim that you can ever have is the one that's never occurs, right? So focusing on those loss frequencies with insurance, or with restaurants, obviously you're always going to be looking at slips, trips, falls, strains and sprains, things like that. So having a targeted approach that will reduce those types of claims will have an impact on your loss retentions, because over time, if you reduce the frequency, which we can control, the severity will come down. And that's happened every time I've ever done this, for the most part. Yeah.
Well, let's get more in the weeds. What are 3 to 5 characteristics of a very successful program?
Okay. Well, I will tell you that I've done a lot of large risk management assessments and for large organizations, and it's consistent throughout. It doesn't matter what industry or what we're talking about. I just recently did one with assessing an aviation program. They have the same issues there in the program as that I see in normal organizations. But essentially, it's just like any other management system. If the leaders in the organization want to get it done and they want to focus on something, it happens. Where I see the most gaps it's going to be lack of management support. And that might be because of just maybe not understanding, right? Understanding I don't know why that with safety management or managing a safety program, it's not looked at just like any other business process. But that's what I do. I look at it as a business process and integrate it into the organization. So having management support.
Let's pause on that one. Because I'm seeing this in some of our members, both in terms of not just safety, but how to get the managers on board. What have you done that worked to get managers on board?
I'm not one that believes that throwing money like incentive programs and things like that. But if you have let's say you have a restaurant chain, whoever the manager of each of those organizations is going to have they're going to have responsibility for showing profitability, sales, maybe employee retention and different things, right? So you just build a safety program in the same way you manage the rest of the organization. Not something that's on the shelf, but something that's managed in this exact same way. So if they're incentivized on maybe a bonus or something, so a portion of that bonus should be based on how they perform safety wise. Now, if you do that without having right systems in place, it's not going to be effective, right? You can't not have tools and have the right systems in place, or at least some kind of education or understanding at the management level. So that's a way. Another way that they do it is allocating your cost if you're not doing it already. But again, actually implementing something and a focus is really where it's going to come down to, is focusing on those areas that need to be addressed. And quite honestly, it's very rarely, we're not doing training, we're not doing inspections, we're not doing all the stuff you think safety people do. It's usually, either lack of managing it, poorly managing it, or just saying, well, hey, that's just part of our risk, it's going to happen.
In your experience, do you feel like most of the members that you go and talk to get it, like at the ownership level, they understand that this is important, or do you get pushback thinking, oh, that's not a big deal?
Yeah, it's difficult at times to get it across. I forget what the adage or the cliche is about, people have to feel the pain before they want to
Right.
do something about it. And
Right.
so if they're feeling pain, a lot of times it's not really even related to safety. It might be, again, going back to, let me step back a little bit. The process to reducing losses, whether you have a self-insured retention, a deductible, or your every dollar, first dollar insurance program, the process is the same. Okay.
Mhm.
It's just measuring, and what you measure and things might be different from a financial standpoint. Um, so if you go back to how you get their attention, if they're not feeling the pain, you maybe have to show them that, hey, this is something that we can control. So if I'm able to work with a restaurant, I haven't looked recently what their margin generally is. Do you know what a general margin
It's
is for a
different.
restaurant?
It's
Yeah,
different for, fast food, fine dining, fast casuals.
right.
It's across the board.
But if I'm able to, let's say that I could have an impact on that margin of maybe even 1%,
Hmm.
that's pretty telling, right?
Hmm.
So in order to do that, you have to do some financial analysis as far as how we're going to reduce the losses, making sure that, hey, not that we don't want safe organizations, but we also want to have a return on whatever we're investing into that organization, right? And if that means improving safety and reducing accidents, and we can increase our margins, be more competitive, because now maybe we're not as impacted by things like inflation and things like that,
Hmm.
and having to increase our prices more to keep up because of losses, then those kinds of things are really what, in my mind, are more telling than going out there and saying, "Oh, well, OSHA says,"
Hmm.
or
Right.
things of that nature. So it's
Especially
really
that's a,
getting it into a business process and having the
yeah.
business understanding of implementing the right procedures and so on and so forth.
And that really speaks to a lot of our members, because in fast food, as you know, 10 cents on a price of a taco can completely change, your bottom line. So when we're looking at ways that we can reduce costs and
Yeah.
exposure, it
It-
does make a huge difference, which leads me to the next question, which is, how do you measure success in a risk prevention program?
Yeah, well, just like any other organization or any other business processes, number one, I have to do an assessment, right? That might be on losses, and I'm looking at losses. I'm looking at how it's operated, talking to stakeholders and things like that, so I can come up with some measurable objectives, right? I'm sure everybody that's listening to this probably has heard of SMART goals, you know,
Hmm.
goals that are set are specific, measurable, achievable, reasonable, and timely.
Hmm.
And so I work with the organization to find out what their goals and objectives are, and how do I align the risk management or risks and safety process with those goals. Now, and if reducing incidents and accidents are part of that, then that's what we'll measure. But we want to have them, we want to measure them, we want to implement the process, and then we monitor and make sure that it's a continuous improvement process, right? Then we
Hmm.
monitor it to make sure that we're achieving what we set out to. And if we're not, we go back to the drawing board and say, hey, let's take a look at this, and what do we need to change? But measuring that success, so that's how I measure it,
Yep.
is through that process, and through objective goals and objectives.
So let's get even more in the weeds. How do you specifically reduce losses in a company?
Again, that process that I talked about, um, very rarely like I mentioned before, very rarely uh, is it not a management issue. I read a book by Patrick Lencioni. I forgot the name of it. He wrote the one that a lot of people might that I would recommend, that a lot of people might have heard of, is the five dysfunctions of a team.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he wrote another book. And the very first line, it's the only thing I remember from the book. The very first line, basically, obviously ad-libbing, was is that most things can be controlled through improving management systems, which don't cost the organization any money, right?
Right.
And so generally, I'm looking at management processes and things of that nature. Things like accountability. No one's held accountable.
Right.
And just basic things, for management to occur, you have to have responsibility, authority, and accountability. So understanding those things and then applying safety, um, you know, how I bring safety into it. A lot of times I'm not even bringing anything safety. I'm not doing inspections. I'm not doing training. I might be saying, okay, uh, no one's responsible for these things. We need to change that.
Yeah.
And making sure that they do have solid objectives and goals that they're working towards. So, it's not a cookie cutter approach. If you're an organization that's having problems with slips, trips, and falls, or strains and sprains, or struck by, those are going to be the three main claims in a restaurant. And someone says, "Oh, well, we can give you some training on that." Well, I'm not saying that you don't need to train people, but training in and of itself is not good enough.
Along that same lines that you were just talking about, one of my frustrations with some loss prevention that we've used over the years was it was almost as if they were acting in a silo where they were going out and doing loss prevention services.
Yeah.
But there was no communication between claims and underwriting and loss prevention.
Right.
So as the CEO and as a member owned nonprofit, we want to make sure that every dollar that we're spending makes a difference. So what we were finding was we would hire a loss prevention company and they would spend most of their time making sure that there were eye wash stations when we don't have any claims on eye injuries, which regulatorily we know that those things need to happen, but that's where all their time was spent on regulatory things as opposed to, hey, we just saw an uptick in this type of claim, or this particular member, hey, these locations that are managed by this manager are having issues. So we have a strong emphasis on integrating our data between all of those different providers so that when we're doing loss prevention, we're actually focusing on where the costs actually are. Right. What do you guys do in that regard?
That's exactly what we do. Pretty much everything starts with a loss analysis.
Yep.
And so analyzing losses over, let's say, even 5 years is almost too long because there's so many changes in operations. We had a COVID, things of that nature. But understanding where their losses are coming from, how do they compare to others out there? We can do that as well. But that's exactly what I would do is I bring processes, procedures in that are going to affect those losses that are driving their loss ratios up, which makes the insurance company happy when they do that. And so that's what we do. We start with a loss analysis, but you have to understand the operations of the organization. What you're explaining to me is pretty much, it's almost like the discipline is guilty of that very thing of what you're saying. We have references to that, but it's just an inspection. It's all compliance driven. You can be 100% compliance and still have all kinds of losses. Exactly. I can work with a loss prevention program and get them to reduce losses, and the byproduct of that is being compliant.
Right. What do you see as current trends? Is there anything current happening either with, things going on within the state of California or going on within restaurants that you think is impacting our membership or is going to impact them in the next couple of years?
What I will say is that, California just passed their workplace violence. Are you familiar with that? The SB 553. So, that's something that's driving a lot of activity out there. Personally, I don't think that it's going to do anything to reduce workplace violence. but security and workplace violence are two of the things that we're seeing out there. When I say workplace violence, whether it be thefts, we've seen it on TV. It's in restaurants as well as other retail outlets. I'm sure you've had conversations about cybersecurity and point of sale systems. That's not an area of skill set. That's not a skill set of mine, but I do know that that's another trend that's occurring.
Yeah.
But it's almost the technology oriented things that are really driving things and concern. It's also the things that are difficult to insure against, right? And prevent against. The other one I would say is obviously the wildfire issues and some of the natural, the nat cat, if you will, the natural catastrophe type things that are going on, that, climate changes that have occurred that are driving losses up, driving insurance costs up. Even your homeowner's insurance, I'm sure, has gone up as a result of that.
Well, Tim, I can't thank you enough for coming on here and giving us your insight. And I'm really excited to be working with you guys on CRMBC. And just any parting words for our members?
No, I just say, if you ever need anything, even if you just want to ask a question or you need some information, I'll make it available to everybody, and they can just give me a call. We're happy to help, even if it's just, again, maybe they need some advice or you need a template of a program or whatever it is they need from a risk and safety. I'm happy to be there to help them out.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us for the Self-Insurance Podcast, brought to you by CRMBC. If there's a topic you'd like to learn more about, or if you have any questions, just email us at info@crmbc.com. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share, and join us again next week for more tips on self-insurance.